Welcome to episode 13 of the Liberty Itch podcast. Our guest today is UK-based novelist Danny King. Tom, my fellow Liberty Itch, that could be misconstrued. My colleague Tom was keen to interview Danny principally about his latest book, Cancelled. Cancelled is a satirical novel about a woke utopia called New Brittania. The protagonist, Sienna, is a star in the field of identifying people with problematic views and cancelling them from mainstream society. To reiterate, yes, this is a fictional satirical story and not a reference guide to Starmer's Britain nor Albo's vision for Australia. It is sort of like the Hunger Games, except written from the initially cheerful perspective of one of the privileged capital citizens where everyone is insanely woke. Which still sounds like Starmer's Britain and Albo's Australia, doesn't it? Anyway, the particularly interesting aspect of Danny's book, Cancelled, is that it was, well, cancelled. Yes, it seems that the wokerati do not only lack any sense of reality and rationality, but also of irony. Danny has had over 20 books published, won countless literary awards, and even had a BBC TV series made from one of his books. Yet when he submitted Cancelled, no publisher was willing to publish it. Fortunately for us, Danny self-published, links in the description below, and readers and critics are raving about it. It is even already shortlisted for the Prometheus Best Novel of 2025, having been nominated by the Libertarian Futurist Society. So Tom spoke to the man himself 2 days before his birthday while he was still young. Happy birthday, Danny.
Thanks for having a chat with us today, Danny.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me.
Not a problem, anytime. Let's talk about your book, Cancelled, which I've mostly read. Where do I begin? I mean, it's very funny. It's bitterly funny, but it also could be an instruction manual for New Britannia in the future. I mean, considering how insane the left are, I mean, getting certificates. Poor old Malik in the book had to get 3 certificates, and he got 2, and I'm just like, yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, where did sort of this idea generate from, and is it just everything you see taken to an illogical, perhaps logical conclusion?
Well, it is. It very much is. It's everything that's going on in the media, everything that's going on in real life, everything, things that are happening. All of these things have just, I guess they've been swirling around my brain like the formation of the solar system, and they've slowly all come together in one book. There is, as you know, there's a very much a sort of a push for diversity and wokeness and left leaning and stuff like that. And I thought, well, what if we just went with this and ran with it and just pushed it to as far as it would go? Where would we end up? And I'm a big fan of George Orwell, and 1984 and Animal Farm are just, they're seminal books. And I've always wanted to write something in that ilk. And I kind of thought, well, maybe I could write a sort of I wouldn't dare put my name in the same breath as George Orwell, but that was the inspiration. Could I do something with today's society, projecting forward in the way that Orwell did when he wrote 1984? I think he wrote it in about 1948, didn't he? And he's looking forward 40 years ahead. With this, I'm looking forward 60 years ahead. I mean, looking forward isn't really the word I should be using, but yeah, I try to have as much. There's probably a little bit of I've taken each strand and I've tried to be as logical with it as I could. Each policy, whether it be, policy surrounding sex, policy surrounding gender, policy surrounding immigration, policy surrounding meat, and even things like peanuts. Peanuts are, just are insane, that the rules surrounding nuts and stuff like that. And I've just taken money and media and everything, and I've just tried to see where it would take us. And in one way, I mean, I've described, in one way, it's a utopian book, because this is the woke utopia, and it's a wonderful place if you're invested in it. But if it if it starts to go wrong, it goes very wrong very quickly, and then it becomes a dystopia. So it's a utopian stroke dystopian novel.
Yeah, I don't recommend any butchers read it because I'll get a big shock. Spoiler alert. I suppose looking at Britain now, I find that, looking from an outside observer, I find it as a libertarian sort of terminal stage 4 woke DEI under Labour, under Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, and now we've gone the same way in Australia. Over the weekend, we re-elected an appalling government in the Labor Party by almost a landslide, even though cost of living is through the roof and all these endemic problems exist. I mean, are people in the Anglosphere and Canada as well, are people in the Anglosphere, it's like, is conservatism, libertarianism not an answer, or is there just no credible alternative? What's to stop New Britannia from happening?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I would say that being able to openly talk about these things and discuss these situations and policies without fear of cancellation, which is kind of what takes me back to the book. The fact that you can't actually, I was mentioning earlier that years earlier, in the 90s, if a politician so much as mentioned immigration in anything but sunny terms, that would be the end of their career. And then what happens eventually is no one's allowed to mention immigration, and then what happens is you get Brexit, because that's the first time the common man, the common woman, gets a say on a very big policy, and so there is a backlash, and so. The answer, what the political elites never realised is you've got to get this stuff out into the open. You've got to discuss it rationally, calmly, and without emotion, without prejudice. And that's the way to avoid such situations. Is that, I mean, it's meant to be consensual politics, consensual government, but there isn't a lot of consensual if no one's actually discussing this stuff.
And it's interesting to me that, especially in Britain at the moment, the Rotherham grooming gangs, which was an actual problem, the Labour Party says, no, it didn't exist. And if it did exist and you notice you're a racist, and don't talk about it. And all these girls and women were sexually abused for years. And that's a failure of having an open society and challenging dangerous ideology.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, in one of the death knell to a career is to be labelled a racist. As soon as you're and so people will go to great lengths to avoid even dipping a toe in anything that might seem contentious. And so there is a lot of there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear with people who are in the public sphere, that they don't want this. And so this is where cancellation and these things take place in the shadows.
And do you think, especially talking about Britain, Keir Starmer thinks Adolescence, the Netflix fictional series, was a documentary and wants it shown in schools as a propaganda piece, and then it's just like, what planet is this guy on if he thinks this is an accurate depiction of reality, or he's trying to make it an accurate depiction of reality?
There is knife crime in Britain, but I think that was they chose a very strange example of knife crime, which I've never read anything like in the paper of a 15-year-old incel. I mean, maybe there has been something and I've just missed it, but it's a lot more common with knife crime. It's street kids. It's a bit of gang violence, and there is knife crime, and so it seemed a strange example to highlight in the program you mentioned.
Absolutely. I mean, taking a different tack, going back to your books, talking about crime. You've written horror. You've written the Zombie Detective Agency, kids books. I mean, you take it on so many genres. Is it just a fact of you like playing with genre, or you have a lot of things to say? How do you sort of approach that?
Well, I think so. I don't want to pigeonhole myself. So I started out writing comedy crime. I was writing the Burglar Diaries, which got turned into a BBC sitcom called Thieves Like Us, and then Bank Robber Diaries, and then I started writing. I don't know. I guess I'm interested in lots of things. I'm a fan of James Bond, so I wrote the Henchman's Book Club, which is all about these lowly henchmen who work for a supervillain and go off and form a book club, and with what happens to them in this sort of James Bond-esque world, without mentioning James Bond because he's not my character, but I think I'm interested in a lot of things. I'm interested mostly in people, and I'm interested, funnily enough, I'm less interested in kings and queens, princes, and I'm interested in small people, in small lives, ordinary people, probably because I'm a small man myself. And so I'm interested in ordinary lives and ordinary people, but doing extraordinary things. And so, I often, the Monster Man books are, he's a strange, ordinary guy who lives at the end of the street, but you dig a bit deeper and he's done all of these weird and wonderful things, and that goes back to my love of, horror films when I was growing up and classical monster movies and stuff. Cancelled came about because, like I said, because there was just so many things in the paper. Well, I tell you what, how Cancelled came about. So let me step back another book. I wrote a book, in fact, I've got it here. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Ugly Sisters. There you go. And that's about, it's basically the Cinderella story. Well, it's very accurately the Cinderella story, but it's from the Ugly Sisters' point of view. It's Cinderella is she's an evil, conniving bitch out to take over the kingdom and pull the wool over everyone's eyes. And everyone is charmed by her. And the only two people who can see it are her supposed ugly sisters, who are, they believe, well, they're obviously just jealous. And so they're not listened to, and so they're the heroines. So I really like to flip. I always like to take a traditional villain and flip them and see what life is like from their point of view. I'd love to write a story about, the big bad wolf just trying to feed his kids by eating some pigs. I mean, what's so bad about that? Why shouldn't he live as well? And so I wrote this book anyway. And I sent it out to loads of publishers, and I thought I had a good feeling about it. It's what's called a pre-sold franchise, because they're characters that are already in the zeitgeist. People already know about them. It's got a strong message. It's got two strong female characters. It's got a good message about substance over style, and I didn't get anywhere with it. I literally couldn't get anywhere with it. But every publisher an agent I approached, they had on their profile, we're very much into stories of diversity. We're very much into stories of LGBT. We're very much into stories about BAME. We're very much into stories about unrepresented voices. I mean, it was almost like they all had the same profile from somewhere, but they'd all written. In fact, so many people were interested in championing unrepresented voices. It's hard to understand how they could be underrepresented anymore. So I thought, okay, so all of these things started coming together, and I thought, okay, I will write a book and it will have diversity in it, and it will have LGBT, and it will have trans, and it will have, all of these culture war issues in it. It will have, the green, green philosophies and everything like that, and gender and sex and all of this, and I'll put it all in, but I'm going to do something slightly different because I don't want to do what everyone else does. And so this is what I did with Cancelled. I did something slightly different. And again, I thought, well, this is going to get snapped out of my hand, obviously, because this is what they've all been asking for. And but it wasn't at all. And I found most agents and publishers never even got back to me. Those that did rejected me in record quick time, like as if I'd sent them a box of spiders, and they needed to get it out of the office very, very quick. Oh no, thank you very much. You know, in the end, I saw, you know, which way the wind was blowing, and I thought, okay, I'll just put it out myself. I'll just have a go putting it out myself. I'll try and promote it. And I did. It's a hard one to promote because I took out some Facebook adverts and put it up, and I think those on the left thought we're not buying this because it's critical of us, and those on the right didn't get that it was a satire, and and thought you're promoting all of this nonsense that, you know, that actually I was satirizing. And so I thought, well, there it goes. It's gonna sink without a trace. That another one down the toilet. But then the Prometheus Awards popped up out of nowhere and nominated it, and have since made it a finalist in their awards. And so that's just been, you know, it's kind of. I mean, I did wonder for a while. Well, maybe it's not getting anywhere because I don't know. Is it a bit crap? I mean, you've always got to consider that as a possibility. Perhaps it wasn't very good. But I think, you know, the fact that it's been nominated for this award and it's got glowing reviews and stuff it reassures me that maybe, you know, it's not that bad. It just needs to be noticed a little bit.
No, I agree. As a fellow writer, it's like, oh, everything I do sucks until someone says,
yeah.
Oh, I got a little scrap of praise. Okay, then I'm the best writer ever to have lived.
Exactly.
If you're right. But it's interesting that you are in the same company, Lionel Shriver, J. Michael Straczynski, which is a really cool thing. And it's such a diversity of topics. Like one book is about private ownership doing space exploration, and then there's culture stuff, and then there's sort of like alternate history stuff, and just really small stories, and I guess in that respect, there's still a breadth of creativity in what would be a very niche genre.
Yeah. I mean, the names that I'm up against, it's just, you know, I mean that's a win straight away. I mean, it's you know, it's a big honor to be, you know, named alongside them. I'm sure they feel the same way, you know. So I mean, whether I win or whether I don't, but yeah, they've you know, they've done some great stories, and you know, and I think a lot of these writers, they've been nominated before, and some of them have won the Prometheus Award before. So you know, it's not going to be easy. I feel like a bit of a Johnny come lately, you know. So even if this is my high watermark, you know, I'm very happy with it. Be included.
Absolutely. I suppose I want to also talk about all the jobs you had, including magazine editor, and I wouldn't wish that job upon anyone either, having been one myself. What sort of led you to writing? Was it always something that you've just done, or have you just sort of wrote one book and then you did another? How did it all happen for you?
No, I always wrote. Even as a kid, I used to make cartoons. I used to write, you know, before I could actually spell. I mean, some people say I still can't, but I would write little cartoons out, and I'd staple them together, and I'd make little books. And you know, I was writing when I first started writing. I did everything on a typewriter, you know, and an old-fashioned clunk 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 typewriter, and I'd go up to the post office, or so the library, and get the books photocopied and then send them out and stuff. So I've been writing for a long, long time. I think I just, you know, in fact, I think some of them, you know, going into journalism was an attempt to be one step closer to being published than, you know, and actually working for magazines, it was a good grounding because it forces you to write every day. It forces you to stick to deadlines. It forces you to write even when there's a lot of noise going on around you. So, you know, that was a good lesson as well. And that helped also, you know, on quiet days. I mean, you know what it's like when you work for a company and you've got nothing to do for 3 hours. You can just open your own little window and write. I mean, my first book, The Burglar Diary, was 3/4 of it was written while I was being paid for at work on a magazine, just because I had nothing else to do. And the boss is looking over. He's diligent. He's keeping busy. That's good. So I've always written, and I'm interested in lots of different subjects. I'm interested in people, but I'm interested in I'm interested in humor. I'm interested in life and world building and stuff like that. But yeah, I've always written.
Yeah, it's always curious to me. I think writers are the unacknowledged psychologists of the world, insofar that I think a lot of us have this innate or fascination with human behavior, especially in cancelled. How would people react to this stilted, over-regulated, meatless world? Well, not completely meatless. Well, in many ways meatless world. How would they sort of live? And as someone, as like one of the characters, a male who's just constantly put upon, like he basically needs permission to breathe. And yeah, it's no wonder how he ends up the way that he does.
Well, people do end up living like that. I mean, I know we're in quite a cushy society at the moment, but I mean, I look back, how people were living, 1,000 years ago, when William the Conqueror rode in and said, right, all of this is mine now, and all of you lot, you're all under servitude to the Lord, and you've got to work for the Lord now, and you've got to the Lord of the manor, and you've got to or the pyramids, I mean, slavery. I think people do what they can do just to survive, and if that means surviving until sunset, just keeping your head down, not challenging authority, not challenging, the man with a whip,
Mm-hmm.
then, and I know the whips are metaphorical these days, but people do what they do just to get through the day. And I think people do, so the more laws that come in, the more people will just, cow down and, knuckle under and, well, we have to do it because we have to do it.
Yeah, because someone.
You look at, you look at whether you're looking at, 1930s Germany, or whether you're looking at, 1960s China during the Cultural Revolution, or Cambodia during Year Zero and stuff like that. They're just, you take an ordinary person and you throw him into this madness, and he's not an Arnold Schwarzenegger action hero, or he's not a world changer. What? Often survival is all you can do, and people do what they can do to survive. At the moment, like I say, I wouldn't compare out my situation at all with any of those. But the more these laws come in, I mean, someone described it as it's like a frog in a pot of water. The old adage that you chuck a frog in a boiling pot of water. Not that I do such a thing. They will jump out immediately. But if you put a frog in a water and then slowly increase the temperature, it will sit there until it boils to death. And sometimes, these laws are very much like this. Another law will come in, and another piece of legislation, and another. Okay, no, we can no longer do this. We can no longer say that. And so, people just think, okay, well, it's just one more thing. It's just another thing,
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't do that, but our French cousins definitely would. But it's interesting you say that, because I live in Victoria. I live in Melbourne, Victoria. We had the harshest and longest lockdowns for COVID in the world, 262 days. And I was astounded that everyone just sort of went along with it. And even when it was extended, and even now, all the documents are coming out saying it was against public health advice. They just did it because they could. People are still like, oh, okay, well, nothing we can really do about it, which astounds me, especially someone who's in the heavy metal sort of alternative community. I never got one text message saying, psst, there's an underground thing coming, let's sneak out. That never happened, which I find astounding as well.
Yeah, maybe you just weren't invited to those
Yeah,
parties.
probably was not cool enough. Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I think I think with the lockdown, I think the other thing that's never ever really talked about is that an awful lot of people suddenly found that they were just being paid not to go to work, and they quite liked it.
Mm.
You know, there was in some cases as simple as that. I mean, I find it hard to discuss the lockdown anyway, because basically I've spent the last 20 years just sitting at home on my own. I mean, I barely noticed it. It was like the entire world got to live how I lived for a few months, and I thought, and they all struggled. I thought, actually, I've been doing all right, So I don't know. I mean, I think people worry about fines, and they worry about getting in trouble, but they also worry about um, public condemnation, doing something and the neighbours going, and take, so there's as much peer pressure as there is government pressure, I guess in situations like that.
Yeah, and do you think? And I want to use the example of bowling alone. Like people just don't have those links in a community anymore to trust one another enough to say, "Hey, I won't tell if you won't tell," or to say, "Hey, this is kind of bullshit. Let's not go along with it."
Well, I mean, some people managed to get out and go to parties. I mean, Boris Johnson got kicked out of office because he was having a very nice. He had a very nice lockdown, as they say. I think, there's lesson. I don't think it would have worked 30 years ago, and I think it worked this time round because people are fairly insular anyway. They've got everything, if they've got Netflix, if they've got Disney Plus, if they've got the internet, if they've got home deliveries for pizzas, why go out anyway? Most people don't even like exercise, so why, I think a lot of people were quite happy to stay in and stock up on toilet paper.
Oh my God, what was with the toilet paper? My God. One theory.
I had loads of it. I was selling it at a very, very top dollar,
Fantastic. Good on you. Yeah, it's
end up writing on it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because the lockdowns as a draconian tyrannical thing was I was doing calisthenics via Zoom, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm Winston Smith.
Yeah.
Like that's the first thing that popped into my head. And that's sort of when it crystallized for me, like, this is not right. This is human rights violation. But I suppose you have to be a bit of a nerd, and you have to have a big Venn diagram of nerd, 1984 science fiction fans. Like, oh my God, this is what's happening. But that's probably me, you, and 3 other people. But
well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm not a nerd though,
Oh, sorry.
I'm so many, many things. But yeah, I mean, it's strange. I think, I mean, I can't comment for other societies, but the British have always been a society where they will queue up. They will queue up in an orderly fashion, and there will be no pushing in. And so we're a society that will adhere to the rules. If the rules are, especially if the rules are, laid out clearly enough by someone in a suit, and so, I wasn't surprised that it worked. And also, like I say, I think there's an awful lot of people who were more than happy to have 9 months off and not have to go to work and not have to see, Debbie, in the office again for 9 months. And, the tricky thing was trying to homeschool the kids. And I learned that the kids are unteachable and I'm no teacher, that those were my 2 takeaways from the lockdown.
Yeah, Australia is a bit different, and we have a tall poppy syndrome. No, if you grow above your station, someone's going to sniff you down. So if you're doing better or flouting the law because everyone else is at bottom, it's like, well, pull your head in, as we say down here.
Yeah.
As for science fiction, obviously you love sort of bending genres and doing all sorts. Do you have sort of a top science fiction book that you always sort of come back to as a writer and think, wow, I wish I could do something half as good as that, or anything like
Yeah,
that?
I think I think there is actually. I think I really like the classics from the first classics that came out was some of the best, and I think that they've often been imitated since. And so I really love John Wyndham's The Day of the Triffids, which is just it's a phenomenal book, and it's one of those, I've read it a couple of times. They can never ever get the films right. I think the closest they got was a BBC series in the early 80s, which was actually pretty good. But the thing, what John Wyndham did is he kind of avoided the spectacular. He liked what was he called it? Rational science fiction. It wasn't about monsters and laser guns and blah blah. They had monsters. You had the Triffids,
Yeah.
but it was more about rebuilding society and what would you actually do, and how would you actually, what would the ordinary person, the ordinary man and woman, do if they were in this situation? And so, yeah, Day of the Triffids is great. Crack and Wakes is equally, is almost on a par as well. So I've read a lot of John Wyndham. He's very good. I read, H.G. Wells as well. The War of the Worlds was I've not read it for many years, but that was, very, very readable. Very, very good. I read some other books, and I can't, obviously, because I've got a camera pointing at me, I can't remember the names of them. But I will remember. I remember about an hour later after we've come off, and but yeah, John Wyndham would be my top choice.
I mean, from having such a diverse sort of reading palette, let's say, are there any sort of ideas that have sort of bubbled up in maybe in your consciousness where it's been like, oh my God, hope this never happens to me? And one comes to mind for me is The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, where he goes off to fight a distant enemy at the speed of light, and he comes back and all of his friends are dead, and he comes back to find out everyone's compulsorily homosexual. I wouldn't want to come back to that. But is there any sort of ideas that you sort of come across in your literary travels that have really stuck to you and maybe formed your worldview?
I guess, I mean, like I said, well, a lot of the stuff that Orwell came up with in 1984. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, people talk about Nostradamus having premonitions and foresight. I mean, there's so many things that in 1984 that are almost like an instruction manual, like I mean, Twitter is now described as the 2-minute hate. There's the constant shift in alliances and wars going on in the background, and you're never quite sure who's fighting what. I mean, he coined the phrase sex crime, I mean, which is, so yeah, I mean, I'd say Orwell is probably the biggest influence on me. I'm sure there are many others. I liked this isn't necessarily a crime book, but this isn't necessarily a science fiction book, but Henry Charrier Papillon was a big influence on me, because it showed me how he was the French prisoner who got sentenced to Devil's Island, played by Steve McQueen in the film, and he escapes from first the French Guiana and camps, and then eventually ends up on Devil's Island and escapes from Devil's Island. And it wasn't so much the adventure; it was the way he told. It was the way he told his story. A traditional writer will go, I came into the room, the walls were red, and there was a sofa sitting there, and John stood up. He had tall blonde, and they'll describe anything. And Henry Charrier never did anything of that. Everything had a story behind it. He would come in and talk about the sofa. This is the same sofa where such and such happened, and then John stood up, and John and everything. He would have a story behind everything, rather than a description. And the result, he wouldn't physically describe everything, but he would describe everything's history. And it gave me a much better way of seeing each of the things, in this room, so to speak, and a much more conversational way of writing. I guess because he wasn't trained as a classical writer. So he had a big effect on my writing as well.
Is that something? Did you study writing in any shape or form, or formally? No.
No. Only I went to journalism college for a year, but that's mostly, trimming stuff up, to fit on a page and coming up with headlines and subbing and proofreading. But writing, no, I've not. I've read a few books. I've read, a couple of, Stephen King's book on how to write, and which is great, and I thoroughly recommend to anyone who wanting to start out. I've read some screenwriting books, but no, I'm generally self-taught, trial and error, a lot of error, some trials.
It's interesting to me because I think when people emerge from academia, they're taught, here's 2,000. You got to explain something in 2,000 words, and it's like, well, why? And now I guess the challenge is the next generation is going to be how you're going to train ChatGPT to give you a decent answer. But now I think it's come full circle. People is like, that's obviously ChatGPT. This is so lazy. Do you think people have come around to say AI has no soul, and it's taken maybe 2-3 years for people to realize that?
Yeah, I mean, I saw a meme once, and it was something about in the 80s we were told that the robots would take all the menial work so that we'd have time for poetry and writing, and it's the other way around now. The robots are writing all the poetry and the novels and stuff, and we're still pulling potatoes out of the field, So it does slightly depress me. I'm on several Facebook sites where people purporting to be Kindle authors, but all they're doing is they're flooding the market with AI written books, and so it's terrible for writers like us who actually type it ourselves and write it ourselves and come up with this stuff ourselves. That more and more people are just entering some basic facts, coming up with a novel, uploading it, and it's flooding the market. So it's slightly depressing.
I think the greatest insult as a writer back when I was starting out was like, this is really good. Who wrote it? But now it's like, if you write something, it's like this is really good. Did you use ChatGPT? And you're just like,
yeah, I know exactly. ChatGPT. I've never used it, and I probably never will. I rely on my own brain. I think it's purely for my son's homework, and that's it. It seems to be. That's Charlie, have you written this? You haven't written this. Go and write it.
Yeah, and what gives me the shits a little bit is that many people think it's a reliable source for absolutely anything, and time again it just makes shit up, and because it's trained to give you an answer no matter what.
Well, I'm staggered at how quickly it's taken off. I'm astounded by how quickly it's been embraced, which I've never been an early adopter. I've still got a Nintendo 64 somewhere. But people I've raced to, and I think the government. There was a thing in the paper recently about the government saying that they're going to be using more ChatGPT, whatever it's called, to manage hospital and doctors' appointments, because they want to take the receptionist out of the. But I think people like my dad. My dad hasn't got a computer. He hasn't even got Wi-Fi. He wouldn't know. He wouldn't know how to act suddenly. And they're saying, "Oh, but there will be courses that allow him to learn these things." He doesn't want to learn these things. He's 86. He doesn't want to learn he doesn't want to learn how to use the internet. He doesn't want to learn how to, how to use ChatGPT. These things are beyond him. There still has to be a human element in it. There are bridges, and there's quite famously the Queen Elizabeth Bridge over Dartford that you drive over now, and they've taken out the the fella that you pay as you go across the toll booth. That's the word. If only I had ChatGPT to tell me.
They tell you straight away.
Yeah. They've taken out the toll booths, and they're just signs saying, "Find us on the internet, pay by tomorrow."
Oh God.
My dad's like, "Well, I can't go over that bridge then because I haven't got the internet. How can I do it?"
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, even the most mundane things that shouldn't have anything remotely connected to the internet into it, like here we have internet-enabled parking spaces. So if you want to park in a space, you have to have this app and pay for it. Otherwise, you're not parking there.
Yeah, and half the time, what if you've got no data on your phone? There's been a case in Britain about this girl who was fined thousands of pounds despite buying a ticket. She didn't buy one within 5 minutes because she didn't have data. So she had to go to her office in order to get onto the Wi-Fi in order to buy the ticket. And because she exceeded the 5-minute limit, she was fined thousands of pounds. Eventually, it was thrown out of court, and the courts found in her favour. But yeah, I mean these unless we have Wi-Fi towers everywhere, spanning the countryside like trees, the network isn't there to provide the sort of society that we're gearing up towards.
Yeah, I mean, taking it back to cancelled, I mean, progress seems to be more laws, more laws lead to techno tyranny, not more technology leads to techno liberation. It's just, they wear those rose-colored glasses, the smart glasses everywhere, and they got to do all this stuff, and they have you can't switch yourself off in a way. And
one of the ways that they cancel you is they take away your smart glasses. So suddenly you don't have access to money. You don't have access to your ID. You don't have access to information or communications. And so once you're off the grid, that's it. You're out. How else so how do you function? And so, it's very much like that these days. I mean, we're certainly going in that direction.
And it's also interesting to me. It's like if we only have more data, we can solve this problem. But I think there are just some things that just can't be. And I read this book called "To Save Everything, Click Here" by Evgeny Ormazov, something very unpronounceable in Russian. And he's basically said governments put tracking in people's bins to somehow reduce waste, but all it ended up doing was, people using their bins more, like the opposite effect, which I suppose comes back to the libertarian thing. It's like, well, let the market decide, let people do their own thing, and there may be some equilibrium or some kind of positive trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, there are, terms like data harvesting are, words that I have never heard of until recently. And so but there is, I mean, we're becoming a society that can't function without the controls at the top, almost like mass manipulating things through data and through watching behavioral patterns. I mean, the basic one is the cookies. If I'm working on my computer, all of our computers are linked, and suddenly I'll start getting adverts for rugs popping up. I think that's because my wife has been researching rugs downstairs, and so it suddenly started trying to sell me rugs. Big Brother, again, we always come back to Orwell, but Big Brother is watching you.
Absolutely. I think it's an AI Big Brother who never sleeps and doesn't need to, doesn't have any morals unless it's programmed into him. So who knows what the next iteration could be in terms of cancellation.
Well, I'm looking forward to the first AI prime minister.
I thought that you already had one.
Yeah. No, he's a wind up, strictly wind up.
Oh, yeah, he's old school, definitely. Oh, man. That guy has the... Do you genuinely fall asleep when he talks? Because he just comes across as so robotic and just
Well,
like the perfect machine man.
I don't think he speaks with any particular freedom because and I don't think politicians these days do. They have so many advisors around them, and I was saying earlier that watching politicians speak is a fairly depressing, because they're all desperately trying to hold back and not actually say anything. Keep my lips moving for as long as possible and let me be clear about this, but without actually saying anything, without actually giving an answer. I'd love to see a politician who just went, actually, we can't do that. Or no, that's all right. Or I was wrong. I made a mistake. But you know what? I've learned from this mistake. And I'd love to see one that does that. But they all say none of them can answer a question.
No, and I think people are just tuned out as well, because over here recently in the election we had, like I said before, cost of living is out of control. Inflation was rampant.
Yeah.
People are worse off than they were under this administration than the one previous. But they just said, here's some free stuff. And one example that infuriated me was the Prime Minister went to a conference, some union conference, because he's a Labor guy, fell off the stage, and the next day he goes, oh, no, I didn't fall off the stage. I just took a step back briefly. And it was clear that he fell off the stage, and he just didn't admit it. And at this point,
you can't believe what your own eyes have told you. Here's the actual truth.
Yeah. And I
think the Australian election, much like the Canadian election, is probably there's a little bit of a backlash against Trump.
Yeah,
Trump's come in and Trump's saying these things, and he's had his first 100 days, and I think that's probably, that's stiffened the resolve of people on the left, and that's got people out in greater numbers to vote against this. If Trump hadn't got in, perhaps if Kamala Harris had got in instead, which she was never going to, obviously, but maybe, it's a stone in a pond, and it has ripple effects. There's the old adage about America sneezes and the world catches a cold. So I think all of these things are ripple out effects.
And talking about the left sort of obsession with, I guess, obfuscating reality. They tried to paint the opposition leader as this Trumpian figure, and he looks like a literal potato, and who talks like this. And there's no ounce of, I guess, that Trumpian humor or exuberance. But somehow, even though matching many of the spending commitments of the Labor Party, he was still painted as this Trump Doge style figure, and it just didn't match up with what was happening in the campaign. But it seemed to have worked, I think.
Well, it's an easy sell, isn't it? It's an easy sell. You're referring to a reference. Is it Peter Dutton you're talking
Peter
about?
Dutton, yeah.
Yeah. So it's rather than say, well, he's his own man. Here's what he's got to say. It's let's tar him with this brush. I think Boris Johnson got very much tarred with the Trump brush, but then I don't think he helped himself massively. They both got silly blonde hair and ill-fitting suits and said the first thing that came into their minds. So it worked. It worked in a way for Trump, but it didn't work out so well for Boris Johnson. But I'm sure he'll land on his feet. But I think that's what the media does. They need a reference, and with Peter Dutton, I think the Trump reference was, an easy one to exploit.
Well, I'd like to see them do that with Cammy Badenoch. That'd be quite interesting to see.
Well, yeah, I've got 20 quid says that she's not going to be the leader come the next election. That she won't be, the next general election, she won't be in charge of the Conservative Party.
Well, will there be a Conservative Party left by that point?
I think there's just two. Well, at the moment we've just had council elections. and Nigel Farage's Reform Party have just run away with it, and they've beaten Labour into second place, but Conservatives are now a distant third, and so I think there will be a reaction. I mean, there's 5 years between general elections in Britain generally, and 5 years is a long time for a shadow leader to be in charge, and I don't think Cammy Badenoch will still be there. I think if she has another couple of bad by-elections and another couple of bad, council, local elections, mayoral elections, I think she'll get ousted. I don't know who. I don't see anyone in the wings. I'm sure someone will pop up, but I think, I just don't think. I don't, Well, that's my own bet. Well, it's my 20 quid.
Sure.
So we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, I think it'll be. She won't last.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. There's no leader here because Peter Dutton lost his seat as well. So much like
really,
much like Pierre Poilievre in Canada. So very interesting times. If your own electorate, which is supposed to be your greatest supporters, turn your back on you. Going further to your own sort of stuff, what are your plans for writing generally? Do you sort of like just to write novels, or do you like to sink your teeth into screenplays? How does your flow sort of work?
Yeah, I mean, I try and, I've written quite a few screenplays, two of which have been turned into films. There's Wild Bill and Eat Locals, and but it's such a long and arduous process to go from screenplay to production, and it's just, I've got another 10 screenplays, and some are in the works with production companies, and some are just sinking down the tubes, and it's just it's whatever, in a way it's a bit of a luck of the draw, really. We've got one at the moment that we're trying to attract. Trying to attach some talent to. That's what they say.
Oh, that's the lingo. Yep.
Talent. And if they're able to do that, then hopefully that will then attract some finance. And there's an awful lot of chicken and egg with trying to make films, particularly independent films. If you're in with one of the big studios, then you've got maybe a better chance. But then you're vying against more projects. So I would generally write anything that interests me. I've got an idea for a sequel to Cancelled.
Okay.
You've not finished it yet, so I won't spoil it. But it's continuing Sienna's my character Sienna's journey and where she ends up, and then basically taking it from there. And I kind of want to sort of look into, explore stuff like cryptocurrency and radicalization and stuff like that, these things. And so I thought I could have a bit of fun with her there. I was going to call it Illegal.
Oh yeah,
but I'll probably change the title at some point. But yeah, but that'll take me a while to write, because we're in the middle of moving house as well, which is always
fun.
Arduous. Yeah, it's enormous fun. I'll talk about my character Sienna from Cancel.
Yes, Cancel. Yeah,
I wanted to make. I mean, I quite like writing female characters, and I wanted to make her a lesbian. And there's a specific reason for this. Is we got a couple of lesbian friends, and they're a couple, and I love this story. They've had each other's babies in that kind of, they had their eggs planted into each other, fertilized eggs, so that they bore each other's children. I mean, this is a, so they've got two children.
Yeah.
But the children that they actually bore aren't genetically their own. But it gave them a link. It gave them more of a link.
Yeah.
And I love that story. But the reason I'm telling you this is because they are dance instructors, and they used to get a grant from the government for running these dance studios. But a few years ago, their grant was cut because they were no longer classified as diverse enough. And I thought they're no longer diverse enough. I think, where are we going with this? And so I kind of wanted to write a story about a lesbian who, so she is, but she's very, very ordinary, and she's in a lesbian relationship and all of this, but about a lesbian who finds that she is no longer diverse enough in this increasingly diverse world.
Because to me, diversity, if you have a bunch of 10 people and they're, I don't know, one's from India, one's from Latin America, one's from things, it's like they're all diverse, but how is one individual less diverse than someone else?
Yeah, I know.
If you think about it, is this the leftist way of like, what if you think about it too hard?
Well, diversity is, it's all about semantics. It's not really diversity. It doesn't really. What I think it used to be called positive discrimination. When I was growing up, if positive discrimination described, favouring one sector of society over another based on, their supposed unrepresented place in society. But I think it changed to diversity because it didn't quite suit to have the word discrimination in the word, so you can't discriminate, even positive discrimination, but it is basically positive discrimination. I mean, you and I, we could be in a room full of people, but we would be classed as not diverse, even if we're, a minority in that room.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way that, I think it's society is no longer geared. I mean, there's a shift in semantics, and everyone has to buy into what it really means. But I kind of object to the words. It's not about that,
Yeah. I mean, I mean, like in Star Trek, there was an episode where they brought back Abraham Lincoln, and you might know what I'm talking about. And he accidentally offends Uhura, calling her a outdated, I guess we'd say, slur. Yeah. And he corrects himself, and he goes, and then Captain Kirk says, well, and Uhura says, you didn't mean anything by it. We've learned to, as a species, to evolve past getting too entangled in the meanings of words and things like that. And that was such a hopeful message in the future. We don't regard words as magical and having their own intrinsic value and something that we ascribe to them. But we seem to go on the other way, almost like words are almost.
It's all about words. It's all about their little tripwires everywhere. I remember a few years ago, the actor Benedict Cumberbatch. He got in trouble for he was on TV and he was defending I will say people of color, actors of color, but and how difficult the working climate is for them. But he said it the other way around. He said he said colored people, and he is absolutely slammed for it. Yeah. And I think, well, I mean, look beyond his words. What he's saying. Look at the actual meaning of his words. I mean, so there are. It's all about semantics these days.
Yeah, and I think, and the thing is, it's weaponized semantics. I think people are intentionally using this to cudgel people over their head with, like the Benedict Cumberbatch thing. Yeah, I mean, what semantically, what did he say that was different to what he wasn't supposed to say?
Yeah,
Well, we're not even saying it.
It's the Monty Python, is it? He said Jehovah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's so I kind of I wanted to bring someone who's kind of in this world anyway, and so she's fully invested in this world because she is a diverse character, and she is she's LGBT, and she's sympathetic towards all of these progressive aims, and in fact she's a fully paid up member of the progressive New Britannic movement, and yet she herself falls foul of the movement, and she's never quite sure how it's happened. And then there are we eventually see the wheels behind the wheels and stuff. Spoiler alert, which I won't if you haven't got to that bit yet, but it's what happens to her. And the other thing that I wanted to explore with cancelled is what does happen to people once we cancel them. Where do they go? I mean, if you're taking away someone's right to work, if you're taking away someone's right to, get on in society, if you're taking away someone's right to atone and redeem themselves, how is this person just expected to crawl away into a cave and die? What happens to these people? So if you rob a bank, they'll let you out in 15 years. But if you say something that you shouldn't, that's it. You're done for life, because it'll always come back and haunt you. Hang on a minute. He once said something I don't believe in.
And the thing is that what he said then could come around and become fashionable again.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's it's like you say, it's the weaponization of language and ideas that is, I think, is the biggest harm and the biggest threat to society at the moment.
And the thing is, with this kind of culture, this victimhood culture, it's perpetual victimhood, perpetual oppressorhood. Whereas I guess dignity takes the back seat to all of that, because the dignity of someone, like you said, they can't redeem themselves. What kind of society doesn't allow any transgressor to redeem themselves, to even, like you said, if you go to jail, you come out not clean, but
well, I guess because the digital footprint that we're all leaving, that we're all making, this will, 50 years time, someone will say, "Oh, remember when you were talking to Tom and you said that thing? Yeah, that's why you can't come in." And it's this digital footprint that we're all leaving, that we're all saying that we can't. I remember years ago there was a 17-year-old girl who she became like a police liaison officer or a counsellor or something in Kent or whatever, and she was like the youngest girl to become, and then they found some tweets that she'd sent when she was 14, and she was immediately chucked out of office. And you think, well, that's it. Her she's 17, she's on track to have a good career, and suddenly her career's over before it's even started.
Wow.
You could argue the right or wrongness of what she said, but allow someone to say, "I retract that. I shouldn't have said it. I've learned from my mistake. Please give me a second chance." This is the Christian value, isn't it? It's to err is human. To forgive is divine.
Mm-hmm. And I guess there's two more examples. There's this one where this woman was being cancelled live on Twitter as she was flying in the air, and she said, "I'm going to South Africa. I hope I don't get AIDS."
I remember I've read a book about that called it's a book, I can't remember the author, but it's called "So You've Been Publicly Shamed."
Yeah, and the guy does TED Talks and stuff like that. I can't remember his name either.
Yeah,
quite
Mark Ronson, John Ronson.
John Ronson, yeah. And I remember this cultural moment because I was there, sitting there. It's like she said this, and there's this outrage, and she's still in the air.
Yeah, she was oblivious of it, and I think they were following her on the news screens around the world.
Mm-hmm.
There was a something that trended. I can't remember her name, but it was something when such and such touches down, and she landed in Africa and found. I think she didn't even mean in a. I think she just, it was a badly worded tweet, wasn't it? It was a terrible joke that went wrong.
Yeah,
it was meant for several, her friend's eyes or whatever, and she didn't actually mean what she said. But that was it. She got fired. She fired before she landed, and I don't know what's become of her now, but I think this thing will perpetually haunt her.
Yeah, and the thing is, then on the other side, obviously, there's this easy to pick on someone like that, but then you see someone like J.K. Rowling, who has come out in defense of women's rights.
Yeah.
She has FU money, and it doesn't really matter if all of her so-called supporters hide their tattoos and never read her books again.
Well, yeah, exactly. She has. I mean, like they sometimes describe the banks. She's too big to fail. So she can come out and say these things, but she can. I mean, I don't think what she's saying. I mean, God, I'm going to get cancelled. I don't think what she's saying is particularly vociferous or hard. She's sticking up for women's rights, and I think that's not a bad thing to stick up for certain people's rights, and that's been underlined in a recent Supreme Court ruling in Britain. That I don't think she never came out and said, I don't like these people, I don't care for these people, I'm prejudiced against these people. She was always saying, we are women. I'm a woman. Well, not me, but J.K. Rowling. We are women. Women are this definition. This is my understanding of a woman. So to be honest, I agree with J.K. Rowling. I think, and I don't, and there are actually quite a lot of, I think, trans people have come out in support of her as well. But often these voices aren't. I think Eddie Izzard has come out in support of her. But these voices, they don't often make it through to the mainstream because it's not the narrative,
Unless they want to make it through to cancel someone.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It seems a shame that everyone. I think the more that everyone's terrified to say what they mean, the more everyone's hiding their true intentions. So and I don't think that's a particularly healthy society to live in.
I think that society would crumble under the weight of its own bullshit too, because I mean, like Philip K. Dick said, it's like the part of reality. Reality is the part of when you stop believing in it, it doesn't go away. And with governments, handing out cash and people saying trans women are real women, it's like, well, reality. Just because you don't believe in it doesn't mean it's not true or not reality.
Yeah, I know. Well, the trans, the trans. I mean, I'm not an expert on trans, but I think the trans debate it's become a religion basically. It's a faith-based question. So it's a question of religion really. This is with there is this phenomenon that can't be proved scientifically, but a lot of people believe in, and it's whether or not you believe in it or whether you don't believe in it defines how you are seen in society. And the fact that a great many people are cannot express a view for fear of. I'm saying this very carefully, aren't I? I'm like a politician, but so many people who aren't J.K. Rowling and who don't have J.K. Rowling's money are being very careful around this issue. Is I mean it smacks of religious intolerance, really. I mean it's like the Spanish Inquisition all over again. I think you should be able to say, well, I actually don't believe this, but I also go on record saying if you'd like to dress in, if you're a guy and you want to dress in a dress and walk down the street, hats off to you. That's absolutely fine. I mean, you got more. There's a guy who's in my local supermarket, or a trans woman, I should say, in my local supermarket, sits on the checkout, scanning the cornflakes. And I think, blimey, he's got more courage than I have, but fair play to him. That's absolutely fine. But I think it's only once one group starts claiming their rights and their rights start impinging on another group's rights. That's where you have the Venn diagram, that's where you have the crossover, and that's where the friction is. If everyone can agree, to respect each other's rights, for freedom and liberty, then, but I think, at the end of the day, it probably comes down to money, really, because, gender neutral toilets cost more to put in and install because you need more of them, unfortunately. So I think it will always come down to money at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone has a vested interest in pulling people one way or the other. So I guess my final question would be, in terms of libertarianism in the UK, I think there's distinct flavors all around the world, which is shaped by history, culture, that kind of thing. And Australian libertarianism seems to have a bit of a conservative streak to it. And obviously, we also have a preferential voting system instead of first past the post. So if a libertarian has a snowball's chance instead of what's even less than a snowball's chance.
Well, do you still have is it still compulsory in Australia?
It's still compulsory. It's compulsory to put your name checked off.
Right.
You can draw anything you want on your ballot. It doesn't have to be formal, but you have to literally show up.
You have to be there, because I remember traveling years ago in like 1990, or I think it was 1990, and there was an Australian election, and these Aussies were having to make their way to the embassy in order to register their vote. Otherwise, they would get fined.
Yeah, still happening.
But I guess that gives that sharpens the mind, as always, getting fined.
Something like that. I mean, it's a bit of a. I believe in the right to abstain from the political process if you so choose, but that also has a flow-on effect where it's not where a mainstream political party doesn't necessarily have to fire up their base and get them to vote, but they have to appeal to as broad a coalition as possible, for ill or good. But I suppose when it's first past the post in the general election last year, when Labor won in a landslide, in my opinion, because there was no viable alternative, obviously for the Reform Party got a considerable high vote. I guess they've only contested one or two elections.
Yeah, I think would they get 4 or 5 seats?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the problem that the Liberal Democrats have had for years, and this is why they've been, campaigning to have proportional representation. But the British people, we don't like change. It scares us, and that's proportional representation. That's something that they do in Europe.
Yeah,
that's something that they do. Johnny Foreigner does that. It's not for us. And so I don't know if it'll ever be accepted. And I think that's why it's so hard for a third party to break through. I think this will be Nigel Farage's perennial problem. Well, and Nigel Farage's perennial problem will also be is that the right vote, the right leaning vote will be split between him and Conservatives. The left vote was always split between Liberals and Labour. That's why I think Labour's always struggled to get in. But I think, and I think now that reform has come about, I think Conservatives are going to have the same sort of problems that Labour have had for years with their vote, their base fracturing, because I think more Conservatives are going to leave to go to reform than Labour voters will.
Which is quite interesting, because I suppose Reformer portrays this far right, whatever that means, party, when it seems to me the analogue for reform in Britain is One Nation we have here, which is a sort of, I don't want to say parochial, but nation first style conservative party, and their primary vote was hovering around 10%, I think 9%, which is an absolute, I guess, revelation for them. But yeah, as it stands, it's very hard to break through, even if there is a preferential voting system.
Yeah, I mean, I did a little bit of politics at school, and I always remember this astounding statistic that in a first past the post system, you could get less votes and get more seats.
Yeah,
and in that kind of, in that way that you could draw a graph of if you have if you got 5 seats and 5 of them are neck and neck, and then the other 3, the other 4 seats are miles for the for the right, you got the blue party wins 6 seats just about, and the red party wins 4 seats by a landslide. The blue party will get in, despite having less votes. And it seems a curious system. I'm not entirely sure whether we will ever correct it, because the problem is, as always, in order to reform the voting system, the party in power has to instigate those reforms. And which party of power wants to instigate reforms that's just allowed it to get into power?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. It's trying to, I don't know, trying to legislate, butchers legislating for veganism. Not to spoil it.
Yeah, exactly. Nicely back to this stunning book by Danny King. By Danny King, which available from
Amazon.
That's it. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, Amazon.com.
But yeah, so I think I've tried to explore a lot of these issues in Cancelled, and I've tried to do it in a funny way as well. Because I'm not preaching. I'm not a preacher. It's meant to be an entertaining read. It's meant to be satirical. It's meant to be funny. I often find that the best way of ridiculing something is by, well, basically, or holding it up to the light is by ridiculing it. And so this is what I've tried to do, and I've tried to be funny. Who knows if I.
Which is good. I mean, talking about the state of British science fiction at the moment, which is Doctor Who with Ncuti Gatwa.
Well, I've not really watched Doctor Who since I think the last Doctor I watched was Sylvester McCoy, so I'm not really qualified to speak. I think I remember him hanging off a bridge with his umbrella, and then I thought, I don't think this is for me. So I've never tuned back in when it came on again. I have heard that there's stories in the paper about it's lost a lot of viewing figures and it might be cancelled, as they say. But again, it's not really my area of particular expertise.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the general consensus of the current crop of science fiction writers is put someone quote unquote diverse in it and make them cry a lot, and it's just not entertaining.
Yeah, well, I guess this is the commissioning editors up at the top. It's a bit like publishing. It's a bit like the media. There's the commissioning editors who are who green light these things. There's an awful lot of virtue signaling there, and so they if they can have diverse storylines and then it sort of reflects better on them as when they're having their Islington dinner parties and well done. But I don't know. I don't know how in touch it is with the vast majority of people. But I don't know. I guess something like Doctor Who, you can't fudge it because the viewing figures are the viewing figures. At the end of the day, and you can't then turn around and go, well, no, people didn't watch it because they didn't get it. It was because they're stupid. Because suddenly that's demeaning to the greater mass of people. So I think you've got to go. Particularly if you're a public broadcaster like the BBC, I think you probably have to listen to you are tied to the viewing figures, and television is a business at the end of the day. And speaking from someone who had a sitcom that was cancelled for viewing figures, I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
And it's interesting that that sitcom never made to DVD or anything. You said the back of your book, because that's how I roll. that there's 4 episodes on YouTube, and they didn't even give you a copy, which I find astounding.
Oh no, I got a copy.
Oh.
I've got a copy somewhere. Where is it?
Oh, this is exclusive to Liberty Itch, boys and girls.
There it is. I should have prepared for this. There you go. The one copy of the DVD in public.
There you go.
I've got it. There you go. But yeah, no, it's a shame. I mean, I sunk a lot of my hopes into it, and I wrote the best sitcom I could, but it wasn't to be. So you got to pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and write some other bollocks next time.
Fair enough.
I hope
I guess let's sort of put maybe this won't be as inspiring as I think it will be. But what do you sort of have in terms of advice for young writers in a world where they could be cancelled in 10 seconds? Just keep going, or mind your P's and Q's, or what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult one. I guess it depends where you want to get to. You either play the game. I think the one piece of advice is you get one chance to make a first impression. At the moment, the best is as an unknown writer, as someone just starting out. No one knows whether you're any good or not. And so they'll have to take a chance based on their own instinct. Mm-hmm. So you haven't got a record of success or failure against you. So be as bold as you can. Just write something you believe in. Write something that you yourself will look back and think, you know what? That's all right. It's not my fault that the rest of the world didn't get it. I think you just got to be, the old cliche is being true to yourself. Write something that you would like to read.
Mm. Yeah, right. Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Don't write anything that I'm writing. I don't need the competition.
Well, it was like Harlan Ellison said to J. Michael Straczynski, because Harlan Ellison used to write his number in the back of his books, and he called him up and he said, how do I sell my books? Or how do I sell my stories? Harlan Ellison just sort of went silent and says, stop writing shit, and hung up.
Yeah.
Cool. I guess how can we help promote this interview? Which channels, how we can promote and you can promote, what works for you?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I'm supposedly on it. To be honest, I'm kind of the wrong. I should be a lot more proactive on social media, but I'm just not. I gave it a go for a few years, and I found I was just like, I was writing memes and doing free shit and pumping it out, and I was getting nowhere with it. And I thought, I'm a 50-year-old man with 4 kids. This really isn't. I really shouldn't be doing this. So I think I'm not that active on social media, but yeah, I mean, if you can tag me on Facebook, you can tag me on Instagram and stuff like that. I mean, who knows? I don't think my dad will watch it. I don't think he can.
Yeah, true. You can't go over the bridge. You can't watch his son on.
I'll just tell him it went great.
Yeah. It went viral. What does that mean? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm now cancelled again.
What's that mean? Oh, don't worry about it. I just need to come sleep at your place for the next year. Oh, well, enjoy the rest of your morning. Thanks so much for your time. Really looking forward to getting stuck into the rest of it. I've read about half so far, but thanks again. Oh, Damon was there the whole time.
I was listening. I was just being a voyeur.
He was hiding.
Yeah, it was good. Had some giggles and everything. I'm actually interested. I'll keep it recording in case it comes out interesting.
Yeah.
You self-published Cancelled.
Yeah.
Is that not kind of a hell of a lot easier these days to do?
Well, it is, because you don't have to, you haven't then got a book editor telling you what to take out and what to change and what to write.
Yeah.
So you are more in control, but the problem is not the writing and the publishing and the getting it out there, is the publicizing it.
Yeah.
So
the marketing itself.
It's getting it on bookshelf, bookshop tables. I mean, when I was first, I used to be published by this company called Serpent's Tail, and for about they wrote. I wrote a book. I wrote a book called School for Scumbags. In fact, where is it? School for Scumbags.
Serpent's Tail published a book called School for Scumbags. That's all just sounds
School for Scumbags, and it's basically about a little delinquent kid who gets expelled from school and goes and gets taken to this like borstal for the worst kids, worst kids in Britain. And it turns out it's run by a gang of crooks who are training them up to pull a robbery. And
cool story.
And this, funny enough, I sold this to Hollywood. Kevin Hart currently has the right to this book.
Wow.
And he has for about the last 10 years. So I don't know whether it'll ever be made. But it, for a time, if you go in a bookshop, you got the tables at the front.
Yeah.
It was for 3 weeks. It was on the tables at the front, and they said it's selling brilliantly. We sold like 10,000 copies in 3 weeks, and it's like, wow, that's great. And then it got taken off the tables because you have to pay. The publishers have to pay to keep you on those tables.
I see.
And then it was put in the back of the shop and all of that. And about a month later, I said, "Oh, great! How many copies have we sold now?" And he's like, "Yeah, about 50." So it's publishers can make or break.
Yeah.
And bookshops as well. Waterstones is the biggest bookshop in Britain, and because publishers pay, Waterstone's own source of income isn't just selling books; it's also selling shelf space, table space to the publisher.
Yeah.
So they, and the publishers with the more amount of money. Because people are eventually, people are ultimately lazy. They walk in the door and there's a big pile of books in front of them. They're going to look at those ones rather than go in the back and, and actually look something off the shelf.
Oh, obviously. But the last book, the bookshop that I've been using was in Dubai. And this thing's got to be as big as an airport. And there's just books just as far as the eye can see. And you're just sort of like, oh, bugger this. I can't even be bothered starting because it's a daunting task. But you do see the books on the table at the front.
Yeah. But I mean, to be honest, that model will eventually end because
it's got to be. That's the thing.
I think
Amazon.
I think more and more now. Yeah, people will turning more and more to ebooks. I think in 20 or 30 years' time, paperback books will be like LP records, vinyl records, because, and in a way it will probably help because in order to there's printing costs, there's transport costs, there's storage costs. You haven't got any of that with an ebook, and so they can, which I always find it amazing when I've seen some authors and their ebooks that are being released are more expensive than their paperback books.
Interesting.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a historian I quite like, whose name I can't remember at the moment. I've read a lot of his books, and he did the latest one on. It was the Iranian embassy siege. Ben McIntyre, maybe. He did the latest one on the Iranian embassy siege. I thought, oh, that's good. I'll get that. And then it was like $16.99 for a paperback book, or $17.99 for the ebook. And you think, well, how does that work? Well,
that doesn't make
that.
It's.
I mean, there's no. I mean, that's all profit. And and this is why J.K. Rowling became so wealthy, is because she got published before ebooks existed, so she retained those records. Those rights. So she sells the ebooks herself. They're not sold through a publisher. They're sold through. I think her website is called Pottermore or something like that.
Yeah.
And so she sells those. And so that's 100% of the profit going to her.
Wow.
The thing is, I mean, it's hard to argue for myself. I bought Cancelled on Kindle because when I go to bed, I'll have my iPad with me and I'll read. And then the next time if other than that is when I'm flying. And it's always when I'm flying, I pick up my phone, open the Kindle app. The book that I was reading on my iPad at home is on the page that I was on. And whether I'm waiting in the terminal or sitting on the plane, I read while I'm there, and then you come home and you pick up your iPad and the book is there. It's not a disdain for the paperback book. It's just that I've always got the book with me. And
you haven't just got that book. You've got 10, 15, 100 books with you.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, so I've got a Kindle myself. You know, I use it and I read it and I think it's great. And, you know, it doesn't tax the thumb having to keep your thumb there, you know. I'm fully committed, you know, I'm fully bought up. But
can you
know, Amazon has been good. Sorry.
No, it's probably what you were starting to say. It's
Amazon has been good because it allows you to upload your own ebooks and sell, so you can be in control of your own destiny.
Well, that's what I was saying with print on demand, like the printing and storage costs. That's all negligible now as well. It's just, you know, someone orders it.
Well, exactly. This is print on demand.
Yeah.
You know, so it's good. So you have the freedom to go directly to the reader, the customer.
Yeah.
But it's all about promotion. It's all about, you know, getting the word out there.
The book shop, you know, actually help that so much now. Like, wouldn't most of the customers be online? So the fact that the book's on the table shouldn't really, I don't know.
Well, I think, you know, shopping habits have changed dramatically over years. You know, my very first book, I won an award through Amazon. It was the Amazon Bursary Award, and I won it for the Burglar Diaries, and they gave me £500 worth of Amazon tokens as the prize. And I remember thinking, this is like in 2002. I think, what do I want that for? What am I ever going to spend those on? You know, I constantly buy off Amazon now.
Yeah,
because I go to a shop and I'm going to buy a new screwdriver, and it's $8.99. I think I can get that cheaper on Amazon.
Yeah,
you know, and I can get it delivered tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, my shopping habits have changed, and I think the shopping habits of many other people have changed. I think, you know, but the problem of self-publishing a book is that you are just one voice in a vast sea of self-publishing authors, the vast majority of which are fucking drivel. Yeah. And, you know, and now you've got, you know, AI written books that are joining the fray. So it's not about, you know, putting the book out there isn't difficult. It's getting noticed. That's the hard thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other skill set in of itself.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I've always been terrible at self-promotion, you know. Yeah. You know, my wife always says to me, no self-deprecating. Don't put yourself down. Don't put yourself, you know. And all
you got to be human. That's
yeah. I know.
People like people.
Yeah. Tell them that you're a genius, you know. I'm a genius, you know. But yeah, that's the stuff that's hard.
Interesting.
You know, and that's what you kind of try and rely on friends and family to spread the word, and you know, and hope that one of these days it will go viral, you know. But you know, we live in hope.
That's the trick, Because once the first one goes viral, then everything goes viral too. So it's just the whole
50 Shades of Grey started out pretty much as that, you know. I mean, and then as soon as that happened, all the big publishers piled in and offered her ridiculous amounts of money to publish it because they suddenly saw it was a money-making machine.
And wasn't that the case of Twilight as well? Like it was supposed to be fan fiction or something?
Yeah, she was writing some sort of fan fiction for Twilight, which turned into, you know, I don't quite understand how one thing turned into the other, but it was published by it was an Australian sort of coffee shop. Was it Coffee House?
Coffee Club, I think.
Coffee Club or something like that. It was a small little publisher, and it just went bonkers. Sex sells, basically.
You know, there was a shop in Australia in terms of that self promotion. There was some guys in Brisbane where I was living. I can't remember exactly how they do this, but there was something along the lines of. Excuse me, they started going into the local clothing shops and going, I forget the brand too. Let's call it Cancelled was the brand. But they went into the shops and they were just sort of like, do you have any of those really awesome new Cancelled t-shirts? And the shop's like, no, haven't heard of them. It's like, oh, they're the best T-shirts I've ever seen. And they kept on doing that. And then either opened a store or went in and said, yeah, we're from Cancelled. We've been selling to some of these stores around the place. They hadn't. And they've got good traction. And at that point, because there'd been these people going in, do you have these Cancelled T-shirts? And the thing took off and went absolutely massive. They made tens of millions of dollars. Now it's a local brand in Brisbane in Australia that's done really,
that's fantastic.
Really well.
I think, quite often, but the first person who comes up with this idea,
it
kind of works. Then the next person who goes in and says, right, have you got that Babylon 5 T-shirt? Everyone's going, oh, fuck off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But I mean, it's funny. When I was published for a bricks and mortar publisher, they would send you to the bookshops, and you'd go to the big bookshop. You spend a couple of days walking around London, and you'd present yourself and say, "Look, I've written this book. Can I sign the copy?" And they'd come down, and you'd sign the page, and they'd put a little sticker on saying "Signed by the author," and it would help them sell. But more importantly, once you signed it, they can't send it back to the publisher. Everyone that you sign is a sold copy. And so, I remember, I think, God, I mean, most of my books were signed. I think that I accounted for most of my sales.
That's actually a really good trick. Yeah,
I mean, there was one small one small bookshop who went, no, because if these don't sell, we want to sell them back, and we can't send them back if you've signed them. You sullied the copy, so
they've seen that trick too now.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh well, if you think of anything that sends you viral, I'll hit you up and just go what worked, and likewise I'll let you know if I find something that works.
I did one meme. I didn't put my name on it, and it did go sort of semi-viral. It was a science fiction meme, and I don't know. It still. I did it a couple of years ago, and I still see it bouncing around the internet. And it was Rachel from Blade Runner, and she's got a thought bubble, and there's that little, tick the box if you're to prove you're not a robot. She's got a little thought bubble, and she goes, "That's weird. Why is it not letting me tick that box?" and Jean, my wife said, "You should have put your name on it." And I keep seeing it, with like 100,000 views and stuff like that. And that was my claim to fame.
Well, but I was going to say the obvious one is you need maybe not Katy Perry, but whoever the celebrity of the moment is to read your book and say, "I'm reading this book and it was great," and that's
that would be good. I don't happen to know any celebrities, unfortunately, or but I would. That would definitely, one shout out from one of these people. Who knows if I win the Prometheus Award, maybe that will help things.
Maybe send a copy to Nigel Farage. That would be good, or Russell Brand or someone like that.
Yeah, could do. Yeah.
Given that they're
Russell
being
Brand,
and had their account.
I think Russell Brand, he's going to have a lot of reading time coming up. Actually,
unbelievable.
I know. Don't get me started.
No, we've taken enough of your time as it is.
Yeah.
All right, Danny.
Well, look, thanks ever so much for speaking with me. I hope it wasn't too nonsensical and gibberish and all of that.
No.
And what time is it on Australia now? It must be getting on for like 8 o'clock.
Yeah, 8:20. Yeah.
2:20 p.m. here in Georgia. So
okay, so 11:20 here. So that's the time.
Nice one.
Start your
day.
Well,
listen. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you so much, Danny.